I wasn't supposed to be there. The moment I stepped through the rotating glass doors of the Westbridge Hotel, I felt the tension wrap around me like a wire pulled too tight. The lobby was all black marble and gold trim, the kind of place that made people like me, people who weren't invited, feel like intruders. "My name is Evelyn Maddox," I told the woman at the check-in desk. She glanced down at her tablet, her manicured fingers scrolling through the list of guests for the Horizon Gala. Her brows pinched. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not on the list." "I worked on Project Horizon," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I should be on that list." She shook her head with the kind of polite finality that leaves no room for argument. "I can't let anyone in who isn't on here. Do you have an invitation?" "No," I admitted. "But my brother." "Without an invitation, I can't." I stepped back before she finished, my breath catching. Through the glass partition behind her, I saw the ballroom glowing with warm light, a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits. And in the middle of it all, Luke, my brother, stood like the crown jewel. He had our father's sharp posture, his hand resting on the back of our mother's chair, as if he was already inheriting the throne. They were laughing at something an executive said, the kind of laugh that told me this was their world, not mine. A sharp ache twisted in my chest. I wanted to turn and leave, just slip back into the street and pretend I had never tried. But I didn't move. I stood there, stuck, watching him raise his glass like a conquering hero. The doors to the ballroom opened, and for a moment, I could hear the clinking of glasses and the buzz of conversation. I caught a glimpse of our father, his silver hair perfectly combed, his face glowing with pride. He looked at Luke like the man had hung the moon. Then, a voice cut through the crowd, a voice I knew all too well. "Who let her in?" It was Luke. His tone wasn't just shocked, it was sharp, alarmed, like I was a threat that needed to be removed. Heads turned, a few people craned their necks to see who he was talking about. I felt my throat tighten. It had been years since I had seen him in person, but some things never changed. To Luke, I was still the shadow he'd spent his life outrunning. Before I could open my mouth, a deep voice spoke from the far side of the room. It was steady, commanding. "Wait, that's Evelyn Maddox." The voice belonged to Langley, Robert Langley, the retired executive who had built this company decades ago. His presence carried weight. Even after all these years, the room went still. Langley stood, his cane tapping once against the polished floor. His eyes found me through the glass, and he nodded, as if recognizing something no one else could see. "She's the one who saved us," he said. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every gaze swing toward me. For a moment, I didn't know if I should run or stand taller. My hands trembled at my sides. I stepped forward, the desk attendant frozen as I walked past her. No one stopped me, not this time. Langley's eyes stayed on me as I entered the ballroom. He didn't smile, but I didn't need him to. Those words, "She's the one who saved us," rang louder than anything my family had ever said to me. Growing up in the Maddox household felt like living inside a monument built to honor someone else's name. Everything revolved around the company, Maddox Biotech, and by extension, around my father, Richard Maddox. He ran that company the way other men ran wars, ruthlessly, with an obsession for control, and with an unspoken expectation that loyalty was worth more than love. My brother Luke was the golden boy. From the time we were kids, he was the one who got the approving nods at the dinner table, the one Dad took to board meetings on Saturdays, like some kind of heir apparent. Luke had Dad's easy smile and our mother's polished charm. He fit the mold perfectly. Me? I didn't. I wasn't exactly invisible, but I was always supporting cast. When Luke scored the winning goal, I was the one holding Mom's purse while she clapped. When he graduated top of his class, I was the sibling who handed him a water bottle and stayed out of the photos. No one told me outright that my place was in the shadows, but it didn't need to be said. "Luke's the face, Evelyn," Dad would say when I was a teenager, almost like it was meant to be reassuring. "You're the one who holds the numbers together. Not everyone needs to be in the spotlight." He said it like a compliment, but I knew better. It was code for, "You're smart, but you'll never be him." Mom never argued. She was always there, hovering quietly, her makeup perfect and her voice soft, like she'd learned early that her job was to keep the peace. I can't remember a single time she told Dad he was being unfair. Not to Luke, not to me. She just smiled and made sure the wine glasses were never empty. I learned to stop expecting praise. By the time I hit my 20s, I'd figured out that if I couldn't be the face of the family legacy, I could at least be the backbone of something that mattered. I studied data science and biotech risk modeling. Not glamorous work, but it was mine. Numbers made sense in ways people didn't. Numbers didn't pick favorites or turn their backs when you spoke up. While Luke was out there giving interviews and attending shareholder dinners, I was hunched over my laptop, buried in predictive models and failure scenarios. Dad didn't understand it. He'd squint at my screens and say things like, "I hope all that coding nonsense translates into something useful." Useful. That was the highest praise I'd ever get from him. I told myself I didn't need their approval, but late at night, when I was the last one awake in my tiny apartment, I'd catch myself wondering what it would take for them to see me the way they saw Luke. Back then, I didn't know that the chance would come. I didn't know that Project Horizon, the golden project Luke was destined to lead, would become the thing that forced me out of the shadows. Project Horizon was supposed to be Maddox Biotech's crown jewel, a rapid vaccine deployment strategy designed to outpace a mutating virus that had already caused panic in 3 major cities. It was bold, high stakes, and positioned to cement Luke's image as the visionary leader our father always wanted him to be. When I got the assignment to work alongside Luke, I told myself it might be my chance to prove I was more than just the numbers girl. I was the senior data analyst for the project, unofficially because my name never appeared in the press kits or on the leadership board. Luke, of course, was front and center, shaking hands with government reps and charming the media. The deeper I dug into the data, the more uneasy I felt. The models I ran on the distribution nodes, especially the facilities in Sector B, showed troubling anomalies, temperature fluctuations, irregular sterilization intervals, and an error rate that was just high enough to raise a red flag. If my projections were correct, even one contaminated batch could cause catastrophic harm. I emailed Luke my findings, attaching a 40-page report with visual models and recommended delays. I stayed up all night perfecting that report, making sure no one could dismiss it as alarmist. The next morning, I found him in the operations room, laughing with a couple of engineers over takeout. "Did you read my report?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't even look up. "Yeah, I skimmed it. Evelyn, we can't afford to hold this thing back. You know how many eyes are on us right now? Luke, this isn't about PR. There's a serious vulnerability in Sector B. If we roll out on schedule, we're risking..." He cut me off with that familiar, infuriating smirk. "You always see problems. I see opportunities. You can't model every risk out of existence, Evelyn. That's not how leadership works." "Leadership?" I repeated. "Leadership isn't ignoring data because you want to look good on the evening news." For a moment, I thought he might actually hear me, but then he leaned back in his chair and said, "We're going live in 72 hours. That's final." I walked out of that room with my stomach in knots. 3 days later, my worst fear became reality. Sector B reported a contamination leak, traceable to a temperature-controlled unit that had failed mid-transport. 12 field scientists were exposed. 4 patients in a trial group were hospitalized. And one of our best technicians, Briggs, suffered permanent lung damage after inhaling contaminated aerosol. I remember standing in the sterile white halls of the crisis response wing, watching the chaos unfold like a bad dream. Luke was already on damage control calls with PR, pacing like a politician during an election scandal. Dad arrived within hours, his voice booming through the corridors as he demanded answers from everyone but the person responsible, Luke. I kept quiet. For all the modeling I had done, for all the warnings I had given, I couldn't stop what happened. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at my flagged report, the one Luke had dismissed, until the screen blurred through my tears. What ate at me the most wasn't just the disaster itself. It was knowing that when the official narrative went out, Luke would still be the hero, and I would still be the ghost behind the numbers. The company's official statement about the Sector B incident was slick, sterile, and full of carefully chosen words. Unforeseen mechanical failure, rapid response and containment, leadership team's swift action. Luke's name was all over it, painted as the decisive leader who steered the project through turbulence. My report, the one warning about those exact anomalies, was nowhere in the system. It was like I had never raised a single concern. At first, I thought maybe I had filed it wrong. I dug through my emails, my backups, every shared drive I had access to. Nothing, not a trace. It was as if my report had been scrubbed clean from the company's servers. That was when I started looking deeper. The deployment logs told a different story from the one Luke and the PR team were spinning. Timestamps had been altered. Whole datasets, mine, were missing. Some of the logs even looked manually rewritten, which would have required dual access authentication, and only a handful of people had that kind of clearance. Luke was one of them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My brother hadn't just ignored my warning, he'd buried it. He'd gone into the system and erased my data to protect his golden image. I wanted to confront him. God, I wanted to storm into his office and shove the evidence in his face. But I knew exactly how that would go. He'd spin it, twist it, make me sound paranoid or bitter. And Dad? He'd side with Luke. He always did. So I stayed quiet. I stayed late every night for a week, piecing together every scrap of metadata I could find. I rebuilt my report from fragments, cross-checking server backups and archived emails, until I had something undeniable, a dossier of everything Luke had erased, complete with digital fingerprints. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't trust anyone, not even my own team. I saved everything to an encrypted drive and sent an anonymous packet to the Corporate Ethics Oversight Committee. No return address, no name attached. I didn't expect thanks. I didn't expect justice either. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere it couldn't be quietly deleted. When I hit send, I sat back in my chair, staring at the progress bar until it turned green. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange kind of calm. Not triumph, just relief. The next day, the company quietly reassigned Luke. No announcement, no scandal. Just a vague memo about realigning leadership roles. It wasn't much, but I knew my dossier had landed. As for me, I wasn't fired, but I might as well have been. I was moved to a dead-end role in the archival wing, far from anything that mattered. My father called that night, his voice cold. "You've embarrassed the family," he said. I didn't argue. What was the point? The day after Luke's quiet reassignment, I came into work and found my name removed from every project I'd been handling. No explanation, no meeting. Just an email from HR with a new title and a new location. Administrative Data Clerk, Archival Wing. It was a graveyard. Rows of dusty servers, old project binders stacked like forgotten tombstones. I went from analyzing real-time biotech risk models to scanning ancient documents no one would ever read again. I lasted exactly 1 day before Dad called. "What the hell were you thinking?" His voice was tight, the kind of anger that doesn't even need to be loud to land like a punch. "Do you have any idea what you've done to your brother?" "I didn't do anything to him," I said. "He did this to himself when he covered up a safety flaw." "Stop with your moral grandstanding," he snapped. "You betrayed your family. You sabotaged your own blood for what? Some ethics committee that doesn't care about us? Do you think anyone in this business survives by telling the truth?" I could picture him pacing his office, his tie loosened, his face flushed. He only got this worked up when the Maddox image was at risk. "You always wanted to be better than him," Dad continued. "Admit it. You wanted to tear him down because you could never measure up." I didn't answer. I'd learned long ago that silence drove him crazier than yelling back. An hour later, Mom sent me a text. Just one line. "You've gone too far this time. Please don't contact us until you've calmed down." That was it. No calls, no visits, just a clean cut. I packed my things that night. The few framed certificates I'd earned, a couple of personal notebooks, and a thumb drive with copies of the work I was proud of, the work that would never see the light of day now. I walked out of Maddox Biotech like I was leaving a funeral. Luke didn't call me. Of course he didn't. From what I heard through colleagues, he'd been moved to a cushy strategic advisory role, still with a corner office, still untouchable. My so-called whistleblowing hadn't destroyed him. It had barely left a scratch. But me? I was done. I rented a storage unit for the boxes I didn't have the heart to unpack and signed a lease for a small studio apartment across town. No one from my family showed up. No one asked where I was going. For the first time in years, I was completely on my own. And as much as it hurt, there was a strange kind of freedom in that silence. I moved to a small town about an hour outside the city, a place no one from my old life would think to look for me. My studio apartment overlooked a quiet street where the loudest sound at night was the hum of a lone streetlight. For the first few weeks, I didn't do much except sleep and walk. I didn't check the news. I didn't open emails. I barely spoke to anyone. It felt like I'd been erased, but being erased also meant I had nothing to lose. I started reading again, things I'd ignored when I was buried under corporate deadlines. Books on biotech ethics, investigative reports on industrial cover-ups, case studies on whistleblowers who'd vanished into obscurity. Their stories sounded eerily familiar. Some of them had saved lives, but their names weren't anywhere in the history books. They were ghosts, like me. That's when the idea started forming. I dusted off my old laptop and built a new framework from scratch. This time not for a company, but for myself. I called it the Silent Ledger, a data model that tracked corporate silencing patterns across industries. If a company buried a contamination report or a whistleblower mysteriously disappeared from public records, I wanted to know. Every night, I worked on it. I'd make a cup of tea, put on some quiet music, and lose myself in the code. It was slow at first. Weeks of cross-referencing legal filings, anonymized hospital records, and obscure online forums. But the patterns started to emerge, just like they always do when you follow the data long enough. It was the first time in months I felt alive. By day, I took online courses in ethics and cybersecurity. By night, I built something I knew I couldn't publish under my real name. So I created a pseudonym, Vi Hale, and started writing. My thesis, The Invisible Architectures of Truth Suppression, wasn't meant for fame or recognition. It was a warning, a record of the ways companies like Maddox Biotech smothered people like me. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but it started to gain traction in obscure academic circles. A professor from the University of Chicago cited one of my early drafts. A small ethics journal reached out, asking for permission to quote V. Hale. I never told them who I was. I didn't need to. Months passed like that, quiet but steady. I had no contact with my family. Luke was still out there, probably smiling for the cameras while someone else cleaned up his messes. I didn't think I'd ever face him again. Then, one spring afternoon, it happened. I was at a symposium in Chicago, sitting in the back row under my pseudonym badge, listening to a panel about bioethics failures in corporate vaccine trials. The moderator introduced a guest speaker, someone who had been injured during the Horizon rollout, Briggs. My breath caught. He walked to the podium with a slight limp, his voice rough from damage to his lungs, but steady. He spoke about accountability, about how his team had been silenced. And then, during the Q&A, he scanned the room and stopped on me. "You were right," he said. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. Then he nodded, almost like he'd recognized me despite my effort to blend in. After the panel, he found me near the exit. We didn't need many words. He just said, "I read your paper. I knew it was you." I swallowed hard. I didn't think anyone would notice. "People notice," he said, "especially the ones who were there." We stood in silence for a while, both of us carrying scars the company would never admit existed. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to validation. The invitation arrived in a heavy white envelope, embossed with the Maddox Biotech logo like a seal of power. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. I had been gone for over a year, erased from every public record of Project Horizon. It was an invitation to the gala celebrating Horizon's final milestone, a ceremony to honor the people who had pioneered breakthroughs and saved countless lives. I almost laughed when I read that. Saved lives? They'd nearly ruined them. I almost threw it away. But something in me stirred. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was defiance, but I knew I had to go. Not to be recognized, because I didn't expect that, but because I wanted to see the machine up close again. I wanted to look them in the eye and know I'd survived it all. When I arrived at the Grand Lausanne Hotel, the sight of the chandeliered lobby took me straight back to that first gala, where I wasn't even on the list. The air smelled of roses and expensive wine, and every corner gleamed like a movie set. I expected to feel out of place again, but this time, I didn't shrink. I checked in with my name and waited for the familiar pause from the attendant, but she just smiled, handed me a gold-edged badge, and said, "Welcome, Ms. Maddox." Inside the ballroom, it was déjà vu. Luke was there, dressed in a custom navy suit, surrounded by board members and journalists. He looked untouchable, still radiating that easy charm. When his eyes met mine across the room, his smile faltered. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through his head. What is she doing here? The speeches began. Executives lined up to talk about Horizon as though it had been a flawless journey. I sat in the back, barely listening, until a name I didn't expect rang out. "Tonight," said the MC, "we also honor those whose work, often unseen, made all this possible. Please join me in welcoming someone who gave us more than we realized at the time. Robert Langley." Langley. I hadn't seen him since that night years ago when he called me the one who saved us. He was older now, his movements slower, but when he walked to the podium, the room fell silent. He cleared his throat. "This company was built on innovation," he began, his voice still strong. "But innovation means nothing without truth. And truth," he said, scanning the room, "does not always come from the ones in the spotlight." He turned, eyes landing directly on me. "She's here tonight, Evelyn Maddox, the one who saw the flaw before anyone else, the one who refused to let it be buried." The silence that followed was heavier than applause could ever be. One by one, people began to stand. Not clapping, just standing. 100 corporate division members, all of them facing me, acknowledging me. I felt the heat rise in my face. I hadn't come for this. Luke stayed seated, his jaw tight, hands gripping the arms of his chair. Langley's voice cut through the quiet. "Some truths don't need a round of applause. They just need to stand." I stood because I didn't know what else to do. For the first time, I wasn't a shadow in the room. The gala ended with a strange, muted energy. There was no champagne toast, no triumphant music. People whispered in corners, stealing glances at me as if I'd stepped out of a story they'd been told not to believe. I didn't wait around for small talk. I slipped out into the hallway, grateful for the quiet. "Evelyn," I froze at the sound of my name, Luke's voice. He caught up to me near the coat check, his perfect smile long gone. "You wanted to destroy me, didn't you?" he said. His voice was low, but the venom in it was unmistakable. "All these years, you've been waiting for your moment. Well, congratulations, you got it." I turned, meeting his eyes. "Destroy you? No, Luke. I wanted the truth to be known. That's it. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life watching you take credit for something that almost killed people." He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You could have come to me. You didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone." "You humiliated yourself," I said. My voice shook, but I didn't look away. "You're the one who buried my report. You're the one who put PR ahead of safety. I wasn't going to cover for you anymore." For a moment, I thought he might say something real, something honest. But he just shook his head like I was beyond saving. Behind him, I saw Dad standing in the doorway of the ballroom. His hands were clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. He didn't say a word. He just watched us like a judge waiting for a verdict. Luke noticed him too, his shoulders squaring as if he needed an audience. "Dad's right about you, you know. You've always been jealous. You could never handle being in my shadow." I almost laughed. "I never wanted your spotlight, Luke. I just wanted to do the job right. But that's not something you understand, is it?" His lips pressed into a hard line, but he didn't respond. He turned and walked back toward Dad, who still said nothing, his expression a mask of something I couldn't read. Anger or maybe confusion. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. I was about to leave when I heard someone call my name again. "Evelyn." It was Briggs. He looked tired but stronger than the last time I'd seen him. He came over, his limp noticeable but steady. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have backed you up back then. I knew you were right, but I was scared." "You don't owe me an apology," I said, though my throat tightened at his words. "No," he said firmly. "I do. You risked everything, and I stayed quiet." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Thank you," he added, "for not letting them erase the truth." We stood there for a moment, neither of us needing to fill the silence. Then he gave me a small, sincere smile before heading out. For the first time in years, I felt like someone truly saw me. I left the gala the same way I'd arrived, alone. The streets outside the Grand Lucerne were slick with rain, the neon lights from the city bleeding across the pavement. I didn't wait for Luke or Dad or anyone else to say anything. I didn't need their words anymore. As I walked toward the exit, I noticed something. People were standing, not clapping, not calling my name, just standing as I passed, their eyes following me with quiet recognition. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't glory. It was something far simpler and heavier. Acknowledgement. Some of these people had once looked straight through me, treating me like I was just another cog in the machine. But now, one by one, they rose from their seats as I walked by, their expressions saying what they didn't have the courage to speak aloud. "We see you." I kept walking, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. My family didn't stand. Luke sat stiff in his chair, his jaw locked like he was bracing for an impact. Dad didn't even look my way. Mom had left hours ago. It didn't matter. When I reached the main doors, I paused. The night air outside was sharp and cool, carrying the faint hum of traffic and the smell of rain-soaked asphalt. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I wasn't walking out as Evelyn Maddox, the shadow of the Maddox name. I wasn't leaving as the bitter sister, the ungrateful daughter, or the employee who couldn't play the corporate game. I was leaving as myself, the one person in that building who had refused to stay silent when it mattered. I thought back to all the years I'd spent trying to earn a seat at that table, trying to prove I was just as worthy as Luke. I used to believe I had to fight for a place in the Maddox legacy. But standing there, under the soft drizzle of the city lights, I realized I didn't want their legacy anymore. Their legacy was built on silence, on cover-ups and polished speeches. Mine was built on truth, even if it meant standing alone. I walked down the steps, the sound of my footsteps blending with the soft rain. As I crossed the courtyard, I caught a final glimpse of the ballroom through the glass walls. Luke was still watching me, his face tight, his hand gripping the edge of the table like he was holding on to something that was already slipping away. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. By the time I reached the curb, a quiet calm settled over me. No applause, no titles, no family waiting to pat me on the back. Just me, the cool rain, and the knowledge that for once I had nothing to hide from. The truth had stood. And that was enough.